Motion was by Shingles with second by Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we have our agenda. Next item is the minutes from September 20th. That was our last regular meeting. And so are there any corrections to the September 20th minutes? If not, we can also have a motion to approve those.
So moved. Support.
So motion by LaBelle with second by Williams to approve the September 20th minutes. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we have our minutes. Next item is correspondence, board reports, and presentations. So the first one is Commissioner Thering, updates from Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Our last meeting, a topic of interest is we had a discussion on ARPA funds. We've had minor little discussions in the past, but we actually sat down and had, I think, a pretty good discussion, and we'll have more. So far, the board's approved 2 projects using ARPA funds. One is for the outdoor fitness equipment at McDonald Park, which is approximately $190,000. And the other is for the additional road work on Broomfield. So where they are currently working to, I believe, just before Crawford, if I'm understanding that correctly, to make that a Class A road. While everything's done and the reroute's in place, it really doesn't add that much more time to the project, and it just seemed to make sense. Both of these projects, if I understand correctly, are part of our 2% request, or a portion of. So that could change the amounts that I've just given you if that is so, if that's given. Both projects add value to our township without adding a huge yearly maintenance. Some of the things that we talked about as far as projects that we can use for our ARPA funds are sewer and water. There are things that we can do to that to improve those entities. These projects would have a direct impact by maybe not borrowing money or as much money. Also have an effect on the citizens as far as maybe what their fees would be for using such the sewer and the water. Rather than raising rates in a sense, and I'm not saying that's what's happening, but that's how my interpretation was, is instead of doing something like that, we could use some of these funds to help alleviate some of that. Other things we talked about were parks. Parks, which are a good thing, but they also add a yearly expense or an increase on a budget item. Sidewalks were talked about, and making our buildings, or looking into making our buildings as energy efficient as possible. Those are some of the top topics that we discussed. If any of you would ever have any thoughts or ideas towards projects that might better our township or community, I mean, feel free to reach out to myself or any one of our board members. We would absolutely be happy to hear from any one of you and bring the topic up at our next discussion.
Questions for Commissioner Buckley?
Thering. Commissioner Thering.
Oh, Commissioner, yeah,
Well,
what was I
ask
thinking?
Brian. I mean, I'm okay
Well,
with
yeah,
that.
I'm looking at you, and I guess it just jumped into my head. Commissioner Thering, questions? I have a question.
Sure.
So, do I understand, so the project that's currently going on down here at Lincoln and Broomfield. Was my understanding that that portion, the Lincoln from the bridge south to the intersection and the intersection, was going to be finished this construction season, despite the fact that they waited until August to start it. But now you're saying the township might put money towards the Broomfield portion while it's still closed off? I mean, is it going to be open this season or is it not?
I believe it's slated for a few weeks, possibly. That's what I've seen, but I don't know. I can't say that for sure, Rodney. I don't know if you can help me with that.
The original date was mid-November. I don't recall seeing anything that changed that. My suspicion is it's probably going to be a couple extra weeks.
Yeah.
But they absolutely are intending on, and so far seem to be still in line to finish this construction season.
Okay. But that other piece could somehow get tacked onto that still during this construction season?
They're already working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's already, the road is all pulverized, they're working on the updated base, so yes, the work's already well underway. The equipment's already there, you know, everything's well in hand to be able to do the work, and the scope was within the ability for the contractor to get it done. So the hardest part of the project is already completed, which was the storm drain updates along Lincoln Road, that they had to do some extra work to get that done,
Okay.
dewatering and such, but with that done, the rest of it is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Having everybody there ready to go is the beauty of
Yeah.
the project. So.
Yeah. All right. And then I realize this is a question really for someone else, but I just feel I can't resist giving voice to it. Does anybody know why there's been no enforcement of that closure this entire time?
Well, that was something we had recognized as a board, and I believe it was Trustee Brown had made a statement for people to, you know, have respect for those that are working down there, and to just, he literally lives on the other side of it, and he drives around. He's probably one of the most affected by it as far as having to go the farthest around to come back, and he does that, so.
Yeah.
I know that there have at least been sessions where they've been ticketing.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say that I heard that they were writing tickets for people that were passing through that didn't live there.
Okay. I've yet to see it happen, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I've heard that it's happened.
Okay. All right. I don't want to waste our time with that. It's a different matter. But any other questions for Commissioner Thering? All right. Thanks for that report. Appreciate it. Next is Buckley updates from ZBA.
We did not have a meeting last month, and we've got a cancellation of a meeting for next month. So maybe about Christmas.
Okay. Commissioner Shingles, updates from sidewalks and pathways. I don't know if you all have met.
We have our first meeting next Thursday.
Nice.
That'll be the first meeting that I will be attending as a part of that committee, so hopefully we'll have something to report next month.
Okay, excellent. And then I see we have some correspondence that is related to the sidewalks and pathways. We're presumably looking at making another appointment to that in the not too distant future. Do you want to say something about that, what the process is going to be?
Well, first I want to express my appreciation for Jim McDonald. He did great work. He was, of course, he's the outgoing chair of that committee, and he did an excellent job. And I appreciate very much his service. He'll be missed on the committee. At this point, we have the opportunity open for anybody that would like to be a part of the Sidewalks and Pathways Committee. Just simply needs to file an application. They can get that application on our website, or they can pick one up here at the office. As we have applications, we'll be presenting them to you. The Planning Commission, this is a committee of the Planning Commission, so the commission will be ultimate body to appoint members to it. Certainly, if you are aware of somebody that you think might be an interesting fit for the committee, encourage them to apply.
All right, good. Thank you. Anything else that anyone is aware of that needs to be reported at this time? All right, we'll move on. So at this point, we have our public comment, our first public comment. This is the one that is restricted to items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if there's anyone here who would like to address the Planning Commission on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, they're welcome to do so at this time. We ask you to come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Public comment is open at 7:12. And seeing none, we'll assume that folks are here for other purposes. There'll be a general public comment towards the end of the meeting as well. So go ahead and close public comment at 7:13. Let's see. So we're ready to move on to our new business. We have 2 project-related ones tonight. The first one is PSPR 22-17, the Sam's Club Filling Station. This is a final site plan amendment because we already approved the final site plan, but they're making a change to it. So I'll ask Rodney to introduce it, and then we'll hear from the applicant, and we'll move on.
Well, thank you. As was mentioned, this is an amendment to the approved final site plan. The document that you have is going to become the new final site plan if it is approved. The amendment is actually relatively minimal in terms of its impact, but it required multiple changes on various sheets, so they just gave us a new plan. The key here is a change in state law. As you're aware, those of you, I know some people are new on the commission, since didn't see this project when it came to us initially. Sam's Club Filling Station was approved in 2021. It's a project that actually dates back to 2005. A special use permit was approved in 2005 to allow a filling station on the Sam's Club site, but they didn't come in until late 2020 to pursue that. After they received their final site plan approval, they had need to take care of some paperwork. One of the requirements was putting in a sidewalk. There was a short stretch of sidewalk that was actually going to need to be on a neighboring property, and that's because of some very odd property lines adjacent to the site. And so they needed an easement to be able to put that in. It took an exceedingly long time to get that paperwork taken care of. During that period of time, state law changed. State of Michigan, the state legislature approved an amendment to the laws governing underground fuel tanks earlier this year. It went into effect on June 30th. That altered the requirements for how large a separation distance there needed to be between underground fuel tanks and municipal wells. This site, it happened to be the original fuel tank site, was about 1,500 feet from our municipal wells. They had received a state permit for that under the old rules. There was a variance process where they could be closer under certain circumstances, and they had met those circumstances. But that permit had expired, and the law went into effect on June 30th and eliminated the ability to get variances. So now they had to meet that 2,000-foot requirement. So that's why you see on the plans, you'll see the arc there, one of the sheets showing the 2,000-foot limit and showing the new location for the fueling underground tanks and the refueling station portion of this facility. So that it has moved to the east and north a little bit to get out of that 2,000-foot buffer area. So you have our report dated October 6th. As said, other than this relocated fuel component, the plans remain the same as approved previously. We've just noted a couple things for you related to landscaping. The proposed change in the location of the underground tanks does require removal of a couple of additional, or one or two additional mature evergreen trees that are on the site that were planted when Sam's Club was originally built. This is actually, frankly, a good thing. Those trees are in the way of visibility at the driveway. It's something that we discussed at the time the original plan was approved. They were removing, I think, a couple of trees then. They're now removing a couple more. And so it actually improved visibility a little bit more than it was. They are proposing some low-level landscaping and some decorative fencing around that fuel facility because it is in the front yard, essentially, of the site. We recommended that they provide some additional landscaping there, and so they did do that. That landscaping does meet our ordinance requirements. So with that, we're pleased to be able to recommend this plan to you for approval. There are one recommended condition, and that is related to outside agency permits. They are still in the process of securing the new state of Michigan permit. We do not have a concern about the state, any conditions on the state permit changing this updated site plan. They're just taking care of the details with that. The other item is that our Public Services Department has asked to review the plan again, and they're in the process of doing that. Here again, we do not expect any changes to the design related to their approval, but that part is also still in process. So we're recommending this for approval, subject to the condition that copies of these required approvals from those two agencies be provided to the zoning administrator. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Rodney? Is there a representative of this project here tonight? Or are those, everybody's here for Mid-Michigan, right?
Yeah, there was.
You are, okay. Is there anything you want to say about this?
Oh, no, I'm Dylan Dempsey with the engineering firm helping with this project. Pretty much everything that he mentioned is where we are currently. We are going through the process of getting the approvals needed with the state. Right now, we're just details ironed out, but pretty much everything is going based off what he said.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Doesn't sound like there's immediate questions, but we'll be discussing it, so we'll get back with you if we have questions. I guess one general question. So I looked at there was one diagram in here where you showed the what is it, 2,000-foot radius, and the tanks are just outside of that. I'm assuming there's going to be underground pipes from those tanks to the pumps. Those underground pipes are allowed to be within the 2,000 feet, apparently. Is that what the law says?
That is my understanding, yes. The law applies to the tanks. And the focus of the law is related to leaking underground storage tanks. So
Yeah,
it's not really considering what might be in the pipeline, you might say.
right. But the pipes never leak, apparently. It's just the tanks.
Well, but also keep in mind that the pipes are filled via pumps. So if the pumps are not operating, those pipes will not transmit gasoline.
Oh, okay. So this is before us, and anyone has any of the commissioners have any questions for either Rodney or the applicant's representative? We can go ahead and voice those at this time. Of course, the bulk of this was reviewed and approved by us last year, so it makes sense that people would be familiar with it. Right?
I'll move to approve the PSPR 22-17 final site plan amendment from Carlson Consulting Engineer for the construction of a new Sam's Club filling station with a relocated underground fuel storage and refueling area on parcel number 14-026-30-001-07, located on approximately 16.8 acres west and north of Vancouver in the southwest corridor of Section 26 and in the B-5 Highway Business Zoning District, finding that the September 20th, 2022 amendment final site plan can comply with applicable zoning ordinance requirements for the final site plan review, including sections 14.2.1, 13.P, required site plan information, and 14.2.S, standard for site plan approval, subject to the following conditions. 1, the applicant shall provide copies of required permits and approvals from the state of Michigan and the Township Public Service Department to the zoning administrator prior to issuance of the building permit for this project.
So moved, or support, excuse me.
So the motion was made by Gross and was seconded by LaBelle. You heard the motion with the one condition. Further discussion?
I had a question, maybe for the applicant, and it's not necessarily germane to the actual, I guess, what we're approving here, but I couldn't remember. The last time we discussed this, I know that the question had come up about electric charging stations. I know that was in their plans, but like in terms of for the future, but
Not for this one.
not for this.
That was the Chris Doyle.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to. I know I asked about it last time too, but I couldn't remember if it was something that was going to be included, or if it was something that it was just like, yeah, we're thinking about that and that sort of thing. So
It
I
was
was
not
just.
part of the Samscliffe project at all. Was it even talked about then?
No,
It may have been
yeah.
brought up, but I don't think,
No, that's what I mean. I couldn't remember if it was actually included in any official planning, if it was just more speculation of that sort of thing.
Right,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
that's all it was for this one.
yeah. And I guess the only reason I was asking is because for some reason I thought that there was some mention of, oh yeah, we might, that's something we're thinking about. That's something we do in the future. I'm curious as to how that works in terms of putting electric charging next to gas. Does it?
Well,
I'm
this
just-
actually, what could do, what Samsco could easily do is actually put electrical charging stations in their parking lot.
Mm.
That would actually be an administrative process for review.
Yeah.
And that would probably be the best approach, really, simply to pick out a parking area and add stations within the parking lot.
Okay.
And I've seen that done. There's some Meyer stores around the state and some other places
Yeah.
that have done exactly that.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just curious as to how future planning worked when you were talking about distances and stuff like that. So.
Okay, other questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Lapp,
yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Squadrito,
Yes.
Gross,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
and Thering.
Yes.
All right, 8 yeses, motion
Okay.
carried.
Thank you. We're good to go. Alright. So, the next new business item is PSPR 22-15. This is the Mid-Michigan College Athletic Fields, the final site plan application. We approved the preliminary site plan application, I believe it was last month or the month before. And so they're back with the final site plan application. So turn it over to Rodney and then we'll proceed.
Thank you. Yes, what you have before you is the updated final site plan for the Mid-Michigan College Athletic Fields project. You should have in your packet our report dated September 30th. We're very pleased to report that since our last meeting that the applicant has not only updated the plan to address some items that we noted in the previous report, but is also taking care of resolving all the outside agency approvals they need. The County Drain Commissioner's Office, as we note in our report, has confirmed that they have accepted the proposed relocation of the existing county drain. They've also let us know that they've approved the proposed stormwater management improvements for this site. So all of the outside agency permits or approvals that apply have been taken care of, and the final site plan meets all of our ordinance requirements that apply. So we're pleased to be able to recommend this plan to you for approval as it's presented.
Okay. Questions for Rodney? Okay, thank you very much. Applicants' representatives, if there's anything you'd like to say, we're happy to hear it and then obviously stand for questions.
Yeah, I'm Matt Miller from Mid-Michigan College. I don't have anything to add. I've got an engineer and architect ready to go if you have questions, but happy to answer anything you have.
Okay, thanks so much. So again, this is before us. It's open for questions and comments from commissioners.
I move to approve the PSPR 22-15 final site plan dated September 21st, 2022 for the Mid-Michigan College Mount Pleasant Athletic Complex located at 2600 Somerton Road in the southeast quarter of Section 13 and in the B4 General Business Zoning District, finding that the site plan fully complies with the applicable zoning ordinance requirements for that final site plan approval, including Section 14.2.p. required site plan information and 14.2.s. standards for site plan approval.
Second.
Okay, motion was by Shingles, the second was by Lapp to approve the final site plan as submitted. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Buckley,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Williams,
Yes.
Thering,
Yes.
Lapp,
Yes.
Gross,
Yes.
Squadrito.
Yes.
All yeses, motion carried.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So the third new business item is the second punch list for the zoning ordinance amendments. We did one last year, and this is round 2. And so I'll ask Rodney to introduce this topic. You have the proposed list of, or the editorial, the actual document in your packet, and then he'll introduce it and we'll talk about it.
Well, thank you. This is essentially a second punch list. This is a case of like any new project. As you're working with it, you identify challenges like a new home. This is really what a zoning ordinance is, somewhat similar to building a new home. And so what you have before you are a set of amendments that are proposed to address some items that have come up during the course of working with this ordinance. In addition to that, because our state legislature is constantly working on their home, constantly changing state law, especially, unfortunately, changing state law as it applies to local zoning. There are some items that we have to change because the laws have changed. So just a few highlights. We're proposing to correct some items such as the public and institutional buildings and uses definition. The term itself was a little bit too tight. It left out schools, so that there was actually no zoning district where schools were allowed as just simply K-12 schools as an allowable use. And they really should have fit under this public buildings definition, so we're proposing to change it so it puts them back in. We're also proposing to add a couple of recreational activities that were not listed in the ordinance as well. Two of the state law changes. One relates to group and family daycare homes for what seems like forever, since late 70s, I think. Family daycare homes were up to 6 kids by license, and group daycare homes were up to 12 kids by license. The state legislature, in their wisdom, has muddied those waters and passed a bill which was signed by the governor, to create an opportunity for essentially daycare operators who are doing a very good job to be able to apply for a bonus, some bonus kids. And so the numbers have changed a little bit. For the family daycare, it potentially had one more. For the group daycare, potentially add a couple more. With that in mind, it unfortunately means we have to change our defined terms in the ordinance, which are all based on those original license limits. And so we're proposing to take care of that. It's not a huge impact. I suppose a group daycare home would have a somewhat slightly more impact on the neighborhood. But this would be limited to a group daycare home that's been operating there for some time and has a very good record. So it's not going to happen in every case. The other interesting one was a very recent state law change that flew through the legislature that requires us to treat residential treatment centers caring for up to 10 individuals as a residential use, basically subject to the same rules that apply to a single-family home. There are certain, let's call them institutional uses or activities like foster care group homes and congregate care facilities that we have limited authority over. We can regulate in this narrow window that the state law allows. This is essentially adding a new one for what they're calling residential treatment centers. And certainly, if you read up on what we're talking about here, these are valuable facilities in any community, and the ability to provide treatment, especially they were focused on children in this case, provide the opportunity for treatment in an in-home setting in a comfortable environment rather than in a hospital type environment. There's value in that, and I don't want to disparage that in any way. The state legislature flew this bill through. It just I don't think it touched the desks as it went through. It went through so fast. The Michigan Township Association was able to get the original bill amended. The original bill had no limit on the number of people that could be cared for. And the MTA managed to get a limit of 10, so it at least has somewhat of a residential feel to it. We are required to essentially treat them like a single-family home. That's what we're proposing to do, is to add that in so it'll be in the residential districts. It's allowable use by right, like a single-family home. And essentially all we did in terms of standards was define the character of that, which is straight out of the state law. So that is something we don't have any control over. We're required to add it into the ordinance. A few other things.
Rodney, I'm just curious, is that care, is that like 24-hour living there, or is that care like coming and going more like a business?
My understanding is that this would be living
Okay.
on the property. The idea is that these folks are in residence while they're being cared for.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions on?
Are there any parking considerations?
We essentially have to treat it like a single-family home. I believe there was, if I recall, there was a provision that we could add a parking space to our requirement, but it was very limited.
So from that standpoint, though, the home itself has to be large enough to, from a zoning perspective, to have 10 occupants.
Right. We also noted during working with this ordinance a challenge with the provisions related to non-conforming single-family dwellings. This right now is one little paragraph. The intent of this paragraph is what I would refer to as the mortgage clause. It basically says the normal intent of this provision, single-family dwellings are non-conforming, is to allow them to be rebuilt if they are completely destroyed. Most non-conforming structures, there are limits to basically if it's damaged beyond a certain percentage or a certain value, it cannot be rebuilt unless it fully conforms to the ordinance. Single-family dwellings, the problem with that kind of a provision, the whole idea with that non-conforming structure provision, limiting the ability to reconstruct it, is the idea is you want to get rid of a non-conforming structure. You want structures that meet our current ordinance requirements. So the problem with single-family dwellings is if you apply that standard, nobody can get a mortgage. And in fact, it can even be hard sometimes to get homeowners insurance. If the homeowner does not have the ability to rebuild that home, if it's wiped out to the ground, mortgage companies are leery about granting mortgages to them for that home. And then the only people that can buy that home are landlords that can pay cash for it. So it does create a significant detriment to that neighborhood if you have a non-conforming house and they can't get a mortgage for it. So this clause is a good one, and I always recommend including the ordinance so that mortgage companies can be comfortable in granting a mortgage. We have, in our case, we have some homes that are in business districts that fall into this category. I don't think we have too many homes that are non-conforming structures. You know, a few maybe because of setbacks, but in most cases these are homes that are zoned business, but are occupied as residences. The challenge with our provision, as we were working with it in a particular case, was that we realized it was actually far broader than it was intended to be, and it essentially threw out the non-conforming provisions entirely, and actually allowed a home, for example, in a business district, to be, it essentially provided rules that don't apply to anybody else. They actually got sort of special privileges, you might say, unintentionally because of how the wording was drafted. So what we propose to do is we propose to replace that paragraph with some language that I've worked with in other communities that it's a little bit longer, but it's also more specific and eliminates those ambiguities. It provides exactly the same benefits to related to mortgages and insurance, but it does not create this kind of all-encompassing get out of jail free card that that paragraph unfortunately did. So that's where that one's about. A couple other things we have. We're proposing to update the Zoning Board of Appeals section, as the Board of Appeals has met a couple of times under this new ordinance. There were comments about some questions about the variance standard, specifically about what and how to apply the standard for substantial justice. So we proposed to update those to provide a little bit more specificity related to that, to give the Board of Appeals a little bit more to work with in that. Again, using some language that has been used elsewhere to very good effect. But as we were looking at that section, we realized that our Zoning Board of Appeals section actually was not fully consistent with state law. There were some inconsistencies with several sections of the state act, the state zoning act that applies to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And so what we propose to do is simply replace the language. We found it easier to replace. Right now our language is in two separate places. We want to bring it together into one section and update it to match the state act. Similarly, we're proposing to make some updates to our plan unit development provisions, and this is out of our experience working with the PUD, the Prestige Center. We propose to update the eligibility criteria, to actually give that a little bit more meat, so that as you're looking at a project, you have some stronger ability to say yes or no, essentially right at the beginning. Is this project eligible for PUD approval? That's really the first question that needs to be answered. And under our current provisions, that had really only two questions. One is unified control. Is the developer in control of the whole project from now till it's built? And two was it either 5 acres in size, parcel size, or was it located in one of our DDA districts or in the Bluegrass Center area? And we felt like you should really have more opportunities, quite frankly, to say no. So we added some language related to the master plan. You'll see in there some additional criteria to look at that will give you the ability right off the bat as you're looking at a project. Is this something we really want to mess with? And so we give you some more criteria to work with, to be able to say yes or no from the beginning, and then and go from there. Beyond just those kind of very simple statements that the current rules say. Also, the current eligibility criteria was kind of wordy. It was drafted more like a master plan than regulation. And so we updated that to give it more of a regulatory character. In addition to that change, we also proposed to replace the current language under the PUD that talks about underlying zoning, that says that uses need to be consistent with underlying zoning. And we replaced that with language tying it to the master plan. because it really doesn't matter what the underlying zoning is. This is not a case where there are two ways to have a plan unit development in state law. One is rezoning, which is the process we do, where we put it in a new zoning district. The other one is like a special use permit, where the underlying zoning remains, but it's essentially a special use permit. You layer on top of that zoning that has certain effects. The language of the ordinance was written in that special use format, but we use the rezoning format, and so we want to tie it to the master plan, and so we propose to change that part of it as well. The last one was the self-storage warehouses. A few changes there, again, based on our experiences. One is we want to correct an inadvertent error. We inadvertently left in the large table, we inadvertently left special use, in the large table we took special self-storage warehouses out of the B4 district, but in the corresponding district language, we left it in. So we had a conflict there when we did our amendment last year. That's why you saw the self-storage warehouse project that Tim Beebe brought to you on Mission, because we explained it's still in the ordinance in the B4, so yes, you can, even though we were proposing to take it out, we left the wording in there, and so we allowed them to proceed with that. In looking at this question, because we do have a fair number of self-storage buildings in the B4 district, we looked at, do we take it out and rezone those properties? Or how do we approach this? And we thought that it would be best to propose to you to leave it in the B4 district as a special use, so to correct that inadvertent error. But then add some language in the section for special use for self-storage warehouses that provides some additional clarity for what we really want. We don't want these self-storage warehouses to dominate the frontage of the lot. We don't want them to dominate the use, because really a self-storage warehouse facility is essentially a dead zone. They're important. They're a necessary service, but there's nobody there. So in a business district, it's a dead spot. And so what we propose to do is require for new facilities that they be located secondary to another permitted use in that B4 district, and also the B5 where they're allowed. So that the frontage of that property has an activity there. There are people there. It's part of the business district active, but it may still have the self-storage facility behind it. A good example of this is Mr. McGurk's facility down to the south of us on Remus in Lincoln, where of course he has his large multi-use commercial industrial building up front, and he has self-storage behind. So that's the kind of framework that we're looking at with the proposed change. In addition to that, and for a similar reason, we propose to make self-storage warehouses a special use in the industrial districts. And the reason for this is that we don't have a lot of industrial land. In self-storage warehouses, we have a lot of them. They are very cheap to develop. So, well, I should say they're relatively cheap to develop. Nothing is cheap to develop. Relatively cheap. And so there has been a tendency to make that the kind of go-to development project for our industrial areas, rather than looking at something that could be far more productive to us and more of an employment center. We've had some conversations with the developers about that. We're hoping that we may see a project or two come out of that, looking at larger multi-use building, industrial building. But in the meantime, we would like to at least move these to a special use in that district, so that issue can be considered. And we've included language for you to look at, when you're looking at a project that might be in the industrial district. So that is, I guess, about the 4 or 5 minute summary of what you have before you. And I'm certainly happy to answer questions as you're reviewing it and considering it. What I will say is that at this point, the next step is, obviously, if you have any concerns or changes or anything that comes out of your discussion that we need to update, obviously we can do that and then bring that back to you. If you find you're happy with what's proposed, or happy with very minor changes, you also have the option, if you choose, to set a public hearing to allow the public to take a look at what's proposed. So
Okay, thank you very much. So you heard the report and then the exhortation at the end. So really at this point, if there are questions or concerns about the proposed changes, if there are other things in the zoning ordinance that you've been wondering about that you want to, open up for possible changes, those sorts of things. So, we've had a short meeting so far, so we have time for a bit of discussion tonight. And then, to the extent that people are satisfied with this, for the most part, we could, in fact, schedule a public hearing. But it's before us, it's open for discussion and comment from commissioners.
I just want to make sure that outside of the changes made due to the laws, or just make sure that there's no changes being made that would affect current applicants negatively. Where they would have to go, go ahead, sorry.
No, there are no changes that would affect any current applicants. Frankly, any applicants that are already in the process would follow the law that's in place when they applied. But none of the changes that we have here would affect any current applicants at all.
Thanks.
Based on my recollection, even if we scheduled a public hearing next month, there's also a public hearing at the township level, isn't there? And there's a first reading and a second. It's a process that would take several months, correct?
That is correct. The public hearing is yours, but in addition to your review, your public hearing and your review, there's also the County Planning Commission has an opportunity to review. They have, under the state act, they have 30 days to review and comment on any zoning amendment that is proposed. And then following their action, it goes to the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees has, as you said, has to hold 2 readings, so it has to be on 2 different agendas. And in between the 2 readings, we have to publish a notice of the second reading. So it is a process that would be at minimum several months.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a follow-up question to Commissioner Therian's question is, with any of these changes in here, would it create any non-conformities that are already, he was asking about any projects that are coming in front of us. Would some of these changes create any more non-conforming uses or single dwellings, residential, commercial, any of that?
No, because we're not proposing to rezone anything. I think the only area where there could be a non-conforming, what I would call non-conforming site condition, is with existing self-storage warehouse facilities that in the B4 district, where that is the only use of the property. And we do have a couple of those that fit in that category. It would not affect their business in any way. They have approved site plans, are developed. Even our one on South Mission that I mentioned that has an approved site plan was not yet developed. It doesn't affect them in the slightest. They build according to the approved site plan. There's no deadline to that. They follow the process. For example, if they're delayed in building according to the approved site plan, they can come to you and get an extension and continue to be under that. Where there's a non-conforming site element is that language I mentioned to you that for the B4 and B5, talking about wanting future self-storage warehouse facilities to be secondary to some other principal use, whether that's office or retail or something else that's allowed in the B4 and B5, something that is employment center, customer focused, has life on the street essentially.
Sure.
And so it wouldn't change anything with regards to those existing facilities, but of course in the future they could come back and propose something to replace a building in the front with something that's more active and more intense in terms of its use if they chose to. So,
great, it wouldn't affect them at all, but it would be considered a non-conforming use.
It would be considered a non-conforming site.
Yes, excuse me, thanks for that correction.
And that's an important element because a non-conforming site under our ordinance, that's actually that area of, and I think we've dealt with a couple of these. The section of the ordinance talking about non-conforming sites, what it says is that an applicant can come before you. Let's say you want to make change. Let's say they want to build an extra building. or they want to expand a building or increase the height or something of one of their self-storage buildings. The ordinance says that they can come before you or for a site plan approval of whatever that change is, that addition or whatever it might be, without having to meet all of the current standards. The ordinance is very specific on that. It essentially says that you need to take care of certain things. And it talks about, number one, you take care of any public safety deficiencies, if there are any. In a self-storage site, there's probably not any. Maybe the driveway is not up to current commercial standards, but that, I can't think of anything else that would be an issue. And then it talks about in that section that there's a menu of 10 broad categories, and it asks that you do something related to at least 3 of them. One of the categories is building improvements. Well, almost every project that comes for site plan approval is talking about some kind of change to a building, and so you meet that one very easily. Other ones are landscaping or screening or lighting or cleanup of a blighted site or parking or access. They're broad categories. And here again, they don't need to do a huge thing, but they could do a small improvement if it's needed. And if it's not needed, frankly, it's not required. So that section is really actually permissive rather than restrictive, in that they can come. It says that they can come before you, and you can approve something for an improvement without applying all of the current standards to them. So it should have, this should have basically no impact from a negative perspective on existing facilities. And as I said, it could benefit them in terms of giving them at least the encouragement to come back with something more active, more intensive in the front of their property in the future.
Okay. And just one other question on page 103, in blue letter E, so it just says the Planning Commission may require that a variety of housing types be provided as part of a residential PUD project. Could you explain your intent by that statement?
Well, our master plan talks about the need for wider variety of housing in the community. This is the section that basically gives the guidelines for what the mix of land uses could be or should be within a PUD district. Obviously, it ties it first to the master plan. It's not as common, it's certainly not common here, it's not as common elsewhere as it used to be, but for a long time, many PUDs, especially in townships, were residential projects, single-family developments. It's like condo developments usually, where the PUD aspect of it was used to increase the density. And it might be used to increase the density in exchange for some off-site road improvements or adding some public park space, so the community got something in exchange for allowing some more houses. That was fairly common, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. So this, we haven't seen that here. It certainly could happen here, where somebody came to you and wanted to do a PUD largely because they wanted to increase the density beyond what our ordinance would otherwise allow. And the PUD section does have some language in it talking about being able to increase density in certain circumstances. All this is doing is giving you the ability to say, if you choose, that you would like to see a mix of housing types in the community. You don't want this to all be single-family homes on 60 by 120-foot lots. That you would like to see some townhomes, or you'd like to see, you want to see a broader mix in the community. It is a provision simply to allow you to propose that essentially as part of the requirement for use of that or proceeding forward in that PUD process.
So it would give the power to this board to approve or deny a project that someone has expertise in, and we're going to tell them what we want. I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding, because that's the way I interpret that. I just want to make sure that's what you meant.
I would disagree with that interpretation. You have to remember, planning and development is an optional form of development. This is, anybody can come right now through site plan approval and develop a site condominium development. It looks like a subdivision, but they would just be doing it with site plan approval. You can do that right now in any of the zoning districts on any of the land that allows that. And we have a fair amount of land that's owned single-family residential where they can do that right now. And we would, if they met the standards, dimensional and density and those things, they would be recommended for approval because they met the requirements, and it'd be like any other site plan. If it meets all the requirements, the state law and ordinance say it must be approved. Plan unit development is a different creature. This is where an applicant is, typically they're wanting to do something that doesn't fit under our current zoning requirements. It's a unique project in whatever way that might be. I mean, the Prestige Center was a good example of that. And that the facility itself was you know, essentially non-conforming use in the district it was in. They wanted to modernize it, and the PUD provided them with the mechanism to do that, and propose some things that weren't, you know, would not fit within the strict bounds of the ordinance. So in that circumstance, the plan unit development approval process is negotiation. Maybe not be the best word for it, but it's somewhat of a negotiation. It's a discussion. There is a collaborative element to it, in that often the applicant has certain things that they want, and there are certain things that the township may want. And we're just simply saying that a mix of housing types, because this is part of your master plan, could be something that you could say this is something we want. What that mix is something they would then look at and come back to you and say, this will work for us, will this work for you? So it's a collaborative effort. It is not a thou shalt. It's much more of a collaborative process.
Yeah, I mean, it uses the word may, I get that, but so if, just to make the numbers easy, if there was a 60-unit building, a PUD development, and 20 of the units are gonna be 3-bedroom, 20 of them will be 2-bedroom, 20 of them are gonna be 1-bedroom, and us as a board can go, well, no, we don't want 21 bedrooms, we only want 10, and we want 30 of these and 30 of those instead. Is that what you're saying? We would have the power to request them alter their configuration on what's needed there based on room makeup?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that talking about buildings, talking about mixed-use buildings, the previous ordinance had the mixed-use building section, but it had very specific language as to as a unit size and all that. And when we updated the ordinance and put in the current mixed-use building section, we eliminated all that. And we basically left it up to the applicant to propose the size, the appropriate size and configuration. All we said was you can't have residential on the ground floor. That's our limit. And we set a height limit. So that's the box in which they work, but what they do within that box was up to them. I think our current language simply refers to it needs to have bathroom, kitchen, you know, the basics of a residence. And I think there's, if I recall, there's something to the effect of it has to be of adequate size, you know, for the occupancy. So very, very vague, very simple. So I would say that no, this is language to simply say you can require that a mix of housing types be used. What you just described is a mix of housing types. In terms of a building, you know, one multi-family building that has 3 different types of units in it, that's a mix of housing types.
Right, but what I'm saying is if the applicant says, here's the mix that we're proposing, here's what would be in there, and we as a board say, well, we don't like that mix, we think you need more of this, less of this, and more of that. Am I understanding that correct? We would have the power to, again, may request, it says right here, may require that a variety of housing types be provided. So do we have the power to say, hey, well, we don't like that split. It should be a different percentage of each of these units than what you're proposing.
Yeah, this simply says that you can require a mix. It doesn't get into any it doesn't say you can change the mix they proposed. It doesn't, you know, I'm not saying that's prohibited. I think that's, again, this is a collaboration. So what you would be doing, you wouldn't be saying, thou shalt not provide, you know, 21 bedrooms. Thou shalt provide 10. But you may, as an individual commissioner, bring that up as a question. It seems like there are too many 1-bedroom units here. Can you explain why you use this mix? They explain it. You either like it or you don't. You say, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me, and then you have that conversation. But again, it's a collaborative effort here. It's not a thou shalt. Typically with the plan unit development, they want certain things, you want certain things, and you come to a point where everybody's happy and the project moves forward, or you come to a point where you say, you know what, this is just not going to work, and the applicant can still go back and do whatever they do with the property under the current zoning, or they can propose to rezone the property to a different district if that's what they choose to do. So, this is, we're not creating a circumstance where anybody is prevented from using their property in accordance with the zoning ordinance. The PUD is an opportunity to look beyond the strict confines of the ordinance at a project that may be very valuable, very good fit for the community, but doesn't fit in the tight box of the ordinance. So think of it in that collaborative format, and that's what the PUD is intended to do.
Yeah, I think that would go, I don't think that really needs to be written in there as a requirement, so to speak. I think that could just be a collaborative effort that amongst us, whenever they bring it to us, we could have a discussion about that. I don't really think it needs to be in there.
Yeah, and I'm okay if you take it out.
I think it's just
Yeah.
putting more restrictions as,
Well, it's not intended.
as I've said from day one, so I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's not intended, it's actually intended to open up the conversation. But if you feel it, as a commission that it is restrictive, this is your ordinance, and these are the standards that you will be applying as you're looking at a PUD project. So if you don't want it in there, there's no law requirement that it be there.
Isn't it true with the PUDs, the way that the ordinance is, at the end of the day, the planning commission either approves it or doesn't approve it. And if a majority of the planning commission decide that this project is not in the best interests of the township for rational reasons that can be, enunciated, and they don't approve it, isn't that pretty much what's intended to happen, or am I misreading that?
Well, I will say, the one caveat I would say is that this, because it's a rezoning process, the ultimate authority is with the Board of Trustees.
Mm.
So you are ultimately a recommending body. But yes, absolutely, as you would in any case where you're making a motion, whether in this case a motion to recommend, the guidance that you provide ultimately the board is going to be important. Say, for these reasons, we do not feel this is a good fit, and would recommend against it. Certainly, our Board of Trustees has appreciated the work that you've done. Maybe there's a special use permit in the past that was not approved by the board after it was recommended for approval here, but it's very common that the Board of Trustees follows your recommendations. But no matter what, your review of this is going to be the most important element of the process, because you are taking the time, and you have the time, to focus specifically on these issues. And so whatever recommendations you make to the board are going to have great weight.
Yeah. Yeah, I had forgotten that it was a recommending rather than a decision, so my point wasn't to, step on the township board. My point was really that in listening to Commissioner LaBelle's comments, I see his point, but I wonder if another way of looking at that is because a housing mix might be an issue that the planning commission might actually hang up on or have questions about. I see that as, I don't know, the more legitimate and likely things that we would have questions about, it seems like they should be in the ordinance, at least to the point of saying, this is something that you are allowed to look at, that's a valid thing to question in a project, rather than leaving too much of that to the imagination, so that when people get before us, all of a sudden things are coming in from left field that people weren't expecting, I guess is my point.
Well, one of the things by having it here, you are, and as I said, this is an element from your master plan, and that we want a mix of housing types, a healthy mix of housing types. By having this in here, it is something that the applicant is going to read ahead of time. And so they're going to be looking at that. Well, do we have a mix of housing types? Could we have a mix of housing types that fits, fits our scheme, fits our numbers, and so they, that's something that they may address. You wouldn't even have to even look at it. Admire it and say thank you for providing a mix of housing types, because they've looked at that and said, well, we probably should do that. Yes, it's May. yes, you may be in a circumstance where you say, no, we don't need it there. But it does put the developer on notice that this is an item, it's a policy item that was important enough to discuss in the master plan. Puts on notice that they ought to at least look at it and have an answer for you. And maybe their answer is, in their application, they say, for these reasons, we can't provide a mix of housing types, but we're going to do these other things instead. And then you look at it and say, well, that's great, and go forth and prosper. So it does provide an opportunity for that collaboration, and it provides an opportunity for a better project, frankly, to potentially come before you.
I guess I read that as a way to avoid little boxes on a hillside kind of situation where you have a development where everything looks the same. It's a little cookie cutter community where there is no variety, and that would give the planning commission the ability to say, hey, this is not really a look that we want within our township. You know, we'd like to see a little more variety, both in terms of meeting the needs of the community who would be purchasing the homes, as well as the aesthetics of not having a whole bunch of boxes that all look alike in the.
No, I would agree with you, but I still think a developer's gonna do with the market analysis that they do, they're not gonna put up something that they can't sell or lease, or that they don't think is gonna be desirable. So they're gonna do, one, they gotta go off of what can we sell, how does it affect our pro forma? Because these are private companies trying to make money. There's not a public sector where budgets don't really matter. So, in my opinion, private sector, they're doing these projects to make money. So what can we sell and what's needed in that area that we can sell? So if it's all these 2-bedroom, 1-bath units, and that's what's really needed, because frankly, that's where most of all these units are going. People don't want as many roommates. They don't really want to be around people, at least that's what we're finding with our rentals. They're on their phones, they don't know how to socialize. So what they're doing is they want a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath just for themselves.
I think the flip side of that argument is that, so from a bigger picture perspective, there's two sides to this coin. The developers are there to supply housing and those sorts of things to the community. They're also there to make money. I think it's important to acknowledge that what makes money is not always what's best for the community, and that's where the Planning Commission does have a voice. I'm not sure I want to abdicate our ability to guide the direction of our community development, but at the same time, we do want to provide an amount of flexibility there for developers to do something that is in the best interest of both audiences, both organizations, so to speak. And so I'm comfortable with leaving something in a may use that or may require that, because I think it just provides a stopgap for the Planning Commission to be able to say, hey, we're asking for this because this is our vision for the community. I've been on the Planning Commission for a reasonably long time, not as long as some, but I've never encountered a situation where the Planning Commission is trying to tell the developer specifically, you must build this, this, and this. That what they're asking, we're relying on a developer's expertise to say, hey, this is what the market is demanding right now. But at the same time, we do still have the right to ask that it conforms to our vision and our master plan for the community. So I don't envision a situation where a Planning Commission is attempting to do that. But if they were to do it, they do it at their own detriment, because it will turn developers away and there won't be the growth and development that we need. So I don't see the language as being a concern personally. I want to make sure in everything that we do that the Planning Commission does have the ability to carry out its charter, which is to plan this community.
I completely agree, just that this particular community is already turning away development and businesses are leaving.
I know, we've
So,
talked about that. You and I have talked about
We've had
that.
this conversation outside of this.
I'll say the same thing in private or in public that I said in private, is that I need to see a level of proof or verification that we're turning people away. And if we are turning people away, I would strongly encourage those people to come to us and sit down in a public meeting and have a conversation with us about what problems they're having. But if people are saying that they're being turned away and not coming to us and giving us their feedback or their information, that's proving a negative, and I can't act on anything like that.
Yeah, so and I have a letter that I've been working on for the last 9 months that I will read or submit to the trustees at some point. So the folks that I've spoken with in this community, developers, residents, just hardworking people in this area, the people that I've spoken with are not willing to go on record, number one, for fear of backlash from the township. So the comments, I said, hey, can I put your name on that? No, I don't want my name on that. I have to do business in here. I have to live in this township. I'm not willing to put my name on that. Can I at least use your
What kind of backlash would be expected?
Well, for future projects that may come in front of the township of maybe finding ways to maybe be a little bit more difficult to approve. So and I'm not gonna go into too many details because I don't want to give these people away. So they've been confiding in me with this information, and they've been very upfront and very sensitive to not sharing their comments. So basically in my letter, I've done my best to summarize what they've said. And I've said to them on multiple occasions, are you sure I can't put your name on it? Because it would really mean a lot more if I could. So that way nobody's assuming that it's coming from me. So I'm really just the messenger of this 2-page letter that I've put together. I'm really the messenger summarizing all the stuff. And unfortunately, I can't use any names. I've got 2 people that were willing to allow me to read their quotes, but anonymously, and nobody else was allowing me to even use their quotes. They said, you can summarize what I've said, but I don't want you to put my quote out there. So I'm just more the messenger. It's not coming from me. This is me trying to, what can we do to create development? What can we do to create tax base? What do we do? What do we got to do to bring businesses here? Those are my questions. It's all in my letter.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's the valid points that you're making. I think that you understand just as well as we all do that without actual developers coming forward and putting their names on things and saying, hey, I mean, the fact of the matter is most of our zoning ordinance is used by right. We have special use permits, those sorts of things,
Yeah.
but the backlash is limited to be able to say, oh, well, I have a use by right here. If they have a use by right, there's not much backlash they can receive. I understand the concern.
I don't think it's that part. I think it's just the flexibility and some other items, which again, at some point I will read the letter that's got all the information in it.
And I think without getting too far off base here in terms of the language, I think that again, my encouragement to anybody that you're speaking with, or anybody that might be listening to this meeting, or listening to us talk, my encouragement to them is that they come forward and sit down and talk to us and say, this is what we'd like to do. I think that they would find that the Planning Commission and the board in general is eager to hear from developers and eager to get their feedback. And if we can't get it firsthand, if we can only get it second or third hand, and not know what the context is or those sorts of things, there's very little that we can act on. But I do struggle to have to address invisible issues that, well, don't put this language in because somebody's feelings might get hurt. Well, if there's a real impact to your ability to do business, come forward and tell us what that impact is. And if you're not willing to come forward and tell us that, then how much of an impact is it?
Well, it is an impact. So what they're doing is they're taking business elsewhere. So businesses are relocating, and if somebody wants to develop in this community, some of these, I'm just going to say people because I don't want to give them away, they're encouraging them to go somewhere else.
But I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. We have
This guy
approved.
gave you a dozen examples.
Well, sure, but we've
So,
approved
you can't-
a ton of site plans.
No, I agree.
So
just
I'm
saying
not-
how
I
much
haven't
more we're
seen-
missing out on.
But again, we're planning our community, and we have the right to set standards, and we have the right to say this works for us and this doesn't. So if there is a dearth of site plans and there's a dearth of development, I would say absolutely. The evidence is on the table. I just don't see it yet to say that people are not coming
I'm happy to
here.
have that conversation with you outside. Of
Sure.
the public forum.
I think we are.
I I can't give away.
I think that this is an opportunity for a conversation, and I do think one of the things that you and I discussed when we were talking about it is that maybe we have an agenda item in the future that talks about what are the ways that we might be able to bring in ideas or feedback from developers in a public way that we can have conversations or interaction or feedback with either the planning commission or the board of trustees, and to get that type of feedback so we understand firsthand what they're dealing with. So I would leave it at that. That was something I was going to bring up in final comment anyways. So
I think your points are very valid, but I'm going to go on record as supporting Commissioner LaBelle, because I've heard separately from him, from a lot of people. I can't define a lot of people, but there have been a significant amount of people that have expressed to me the same thoughts, and they're probably different people, about the struggle they have doing things in this township. So, and I understand completely what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's like, where are they?
Bring it to
I get
us.
that. But a lot of them move on. They go, to Claire, they go somewhere else, and they just move on. They're not going to fight the battle that, they've already moved on. But you're right. But I fully support what Commissioner LaBelle says, because I have heard some of that same language of frustration, and some of us, some pretty significant developers who are doing business here, and they're like, it's tough.
and I support what he says by inviting them to come talk to us.
Well,
and if they won't come talk to us, it's not a problem.
Right.
If they won't tell us what the concerns are, they're not real concerns. They're we can't do it the way we want to do it. That's not the same thing as a real concern. So I don't want to.
Yeah,
I
know.
totally get what you're saying.
I don't want to see them out here on
Yeah.
the island when I've heard some of
Oh,
the
no,
same
no,
thoughts.
no, and
because
we're in
it's very
agree.
valid.
Yeah, we're in agreement from the
Yeah.
sense of, I want to know what those concerns are. I want them to bring us forward to
Perfectly
us.
understandable.
So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I spent 9 months trying to talk some of
get
them
it.
into put their name on it.
Yeah.
None of them would,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Other comments,
I think I
Commissioner
just-
Got a
Singles?
little off base, sorry.
That's
Well, I
fine,
just
good
want to add
discussion.
in that discussion, I've been on the commission, I was on the commission for a long time, went out for 3 years or 4 years and then came back. I don't have any evidence to support this other than my own recollection. If there were 10 site plans that were presented, there may have been 2 that were not approved, and it was because they didn't meet the standard of expectations set by the township. Not because we didn't like people, not because we didn't like their plan, it didn't pass muster. So, I know Ryan and I have served a long time together on this commission, and so I've heard some of this, but I've heard some of it, and what people don't like when their projects get turned down. So when those individuals have had discussions with me, why are you guys being so difficult? We're not being difficult. We have a duty to follow the standards that we've agreed upon. These standards were not willed on us. It may have been willed on us in that prior commissioners approved it, but we didn't, these aren't standards that are being given to us by a body other than this township. So I think we've got to find the middle ground. We've got to have those individuals to come and voice their concerns so we can hear them collectively if you're carrying the burden of everybody coming to you and telling you, it's really not fair to you. But more importantly, we'll never know, especially if you have to talk in generalities to protect anonymity.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I told them, I said, it's not gonna have a lot of merit, me just summarizing it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go on record to present these concerns.
Mhm.
I said, but you really need to come and meet with it.
Yeah.
And just to touch on most of these stuff that the difficulties are, these projects never even made it to the planning
Yes.
commission.
Sure.
So, dozen of them. Over a period of time, which I don't know,
Right.
I just told these people, just give me your experiences over the last 5 years. I said, I don't wanna go back and hash out 20 years. I've only been here 8. I said, just give me the last 5 years. Are you having any recent challenges? And this is basically a summation of the last 5 years.
And if those did not make it to the planning commission, then it's not a planning commission issue. We can't.
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah, we can't discuss anything that's not on the agenda that we don't know about. So if there are barriers within our processes, is that a board of trustee responsibility? Is that staff responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? I know what our responsibility is here because it's very specific. So if there are barriers prior to anything getting to us, then is it our responsibility to advocate for that? Is it our responsibility to hold people accountable for something we have absolutely no authority to hold anybody accountable for? Because until it gets to the commission, it's not an issue of the commission. Maybe that's the gap that's happening. So you just framed it totally different. I just gave my analytic of maybe 2 and 10 haven't been approved. So I don't see a trend where the planning commission is a roadblock to approval of site plans.
Yeah, I'm not implying that at all.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, the more regulation we have in stuff like
Yep.
this, the more difficult it is for people to do things. That's kind of what started the whole discussion. And, the planning commission, like I said, these aren't anything that have come in front of the planning commission.
Gotcha. Yep.
These are all situations that never even made it to us because of the barriers, challenges that have arisen throughout their journey trying to get in front of us.
I love this discussion. This is great. I just want to add to what Commissioner Shingle said. Where we do have input, of course, is what we're talking about now, which is the master plan and the zoning ordinance. So we do have that oversight in terms of coming up with things that aren't somehow, working against development and so on. But I think the more I listened to this and I thought, it's not the planning commission, because the planning commission approves virtually almost everything that comes before
Yes.
us. I can count on the fingers, I think, of one hand, the projects that have been turned down, literally turned down in the last 10 years. I think the real question is going to be, does the township have the right amount of regulation, and are those regulations, applied appropriately, fairly, too broadly, not too broadly, et cetera, et cetera. Some of that is we have a role in, but mostly not. It's largely probably more the trustees and also ultimately the township's bureaucracy, for want of a better word. So I don't know. I mean, we should have these discussions, but I also think it probably needs to be not just us, right? Because there's the township board probably has more to say about that than we do. Do you think, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, the comments aren't directed at this planning commission.
Yeah,
I'm pretty certain of that.
yeah. Except occasionally when people scream at us to do our jobs, but we tend to ignore that.
Well,
We just
not
put
the
that out of
comments
our
I
minds.
received.
Well, and that's where the message is getting lost, is the fact that you've got people screaming that we're not doing their job. We have people who are fearing some type of retribution if they come forward and voice their concerns.
Nothing planning commission related, so I apologize, I didn't make that clear.
That's a problem in and of itself. I've sat on this commission where I've watched staff mistreat citizens, and I'm gonna be very clear, this was not Rodney or Peter, this was prior to them. I brought it to the attention of our leadership when I saw it, because that's unacceptable. Citizens have a right to come into these spaces and ask for what they need. That's their tax-paying right. And for people to not like it because they don't like somebody, or they find somebody to be difficult or whatever, that's just personality. They gotta get over that. And let's color between the lines of what is our duty, and I think we all have a sworn duty, as we recall, because we all stood before the clerk and swore, if we, not swearing, but we swore that we would, serve the best interests of this township. I think everybody around this table, I love the discussion because I think it's healthy and more importantly, it calls the question, because if not, and I've been here long enough to know that it goes back to what Commissioner Squatrito was saying. It was almost, when I started, I was like, is this just a rubber stamp operation? Because that's what it felt like. I was like, okay, all right, come to the meeting. But then we started I think Brian came on, excuse me, Commissioner Buckley came on the council and others. I just joke with Commissioner Buckley, because I know he'll call the question, because he has. These things are recorded, there's minutes, so there's no secret about what's being said and what's being done. This is not behind some veiled curtain. And I think we just have to hear what the problems are, take it to the appropriate people. We don't have any authority. We have influence if there are projects that are not getting to us to call the question of why. If that's not happening, I think we have the right to say why, especially if individuals, I've been cornered a few times. Myers seems to be the public court of opinion for me, where, people say, hey, what are you guys doing? And you kind of say, probably not exactly the appropriate place to talk about it, but, and I've had people come to my office and say, what's going on? Why is this so difficult? And it's difficult because it's, let's just go back to last month. We had a site plan that people wanted to decide what the standards of expectations were when they clearly were not meeting the standards of expectation. So they started saying things like, well, it's going to be, well, it's kind of, well, it's going to. No, that's not the standard of expectation. And this committee stood firm and said, go back, do things the right way. And I think it took us 3 minutes to, I know it took us 3 minutes because that's all it took. Go back and close the loop, and then staff came and said they met every expectation and more. That's the way business should be done. And I think if people have a confidence that that's the way it's going to be done, then some of this culture goes away. Because that's what it is, it's culture. Because it's not policy, it's not, it's practice, it's behavioral. So we just got to figure it out. And I think we owe it to the citizens of this township to do things the right way, to call the question when it needs to be called. If not, then maybe we're not doing our job. But I think we are, because the question is being called. Thus we're having this elongated conversation. So let's get people having confidence that they can come here and voice their concerns, and that there will not be any retribution for their concerns.
And I think that maybe the best way to do that, to avoid that type of future headaches that somebody might encounter, would be to, when we get, in reality, we should pride ourselves on being able to approve 10 out of 10 site plans, because if we did that, what we did was we did our homework previously when we updated the zoning ordinance and we updated our master plan, and people are coming to us with site plans that match what we've asked for. And that's the compromise that all communities make, right? Is that, the planning commission and the township or the municipality in general says, hey, this is our vision for, what we want our community to be. And, but we're a check against, what might be otherwise unrestricted development. But also, there's enough flexibility there where there's a check against us that we're not being overly restrictive and we're not discouraging people from investing in the community. So where's that compromise lie? That lies in the master planning and the zoning ordinance. And if those things fall into place, then there's little that anything else can happen that would prevent somebody from being able to do their use by right or to request their special use or those sorts of things that could be derailed. And so I think that's where, I don't have the answer tonight. I don't know when we would have an answer, but I think that's where we have to try to maybe do a better job. I've talked about promoting on social media and other places when we're having our reviews for our zoning, and when we're reviewing language for zoning ordinance and stuff like that, we're trying to generate more interest in the public. People have heard me complain before that putting a classified in the newspaper is only going to attract the most elderly of the elderly people that are still reading classifieds in a newspaper. So there are ways that we can have better communication and try to encourage people to get here, and we need to explore those. So I don't know if it's an agenda item in the future that we talk about or we brainstorm. I don't know what that is, but I want to hear from the people who invest in this community, who put their money into this community. I want to hear from them. What are your concerns? And give us an opportunity to say, this is what we can accept, this is where we can compromise, and this is where we can't compromise. So good conversation. I like being able to talk about this. We got to try to create a venue for it to get that information.
I think that perception is part of reality, and so it seems like it'd be very helpful to even have a general letter, if there are issues that the planning commission could at least discuss and perhaps send up the chain, you know, if issues seem warranted, to go beyond. And it looked like Commissioner Terry was gonna say something.
I was just gonna thank Commissioner LaBelle for his work that he has done, because we're not the only municipality that he has put together some information. And has that email gone out to other people that this can be talked about, or
What
from
what we
the
discussed
city?
tonight?
No,
Or-
I mean like the city. I just would like to make a comment about what you sent me.
Yeah, no, I've sent that to anybody that's
Okay.
interested in it.
So in reading that, I found that very informative. You know, I heard some things you don't want to see, and I heard actually one of the developers was having some difficulties planning in the city, and actually came to the township and had some nice things to say in that letter. But you know, understood that there was some concerns and issues that I thought, yeah, those are valid concerns and issues, and so. What you're doing is, I think, will be very helpful, and to go a little bit further, I was given the name of a person that I've never met, couldn't pick out of a crowd of, I'd have a 50% chance if there was 2 people there of picking this person out. I called them, introduced myself, and explained that I wouldn't share any information. I talked to this person for probably a half hour about having issues here. They had nothing to say negative. Now, maybe they didn't want to share that with me. They don't know me. They, may not trust me. But this name was given to me. Hey, it's okay if you call this person. So I did. And they said they couldn't say anything good or bad from a personal. They were just talking for them. They did not want to speak for anybody else, nor did they indicate that Ryan was having an issue, but I'm not. They didn't. It wasn't anything like that. So, just to get something to have a good conversation would be good. I wish people would come forward, because there's like Commissioner Buckley and Shingles. I mean, we can't make it better unless somebody's willing to come up and say, hey, I had a real tough time with this.
Yeah, and I think what Commissioner Therrien's referring to is back in 2017-18, when the city of Mount Pleasant went through their new ordinance and the challenges that presented on the residential side as well as the commercial side. There was, I heard the same issues there, and again, listened and compiled all the stuff. At that point, there was probably about a dozen people that were willing to go on record with their quotes and put their name on it, only because they no longer do business in this town for those reasons. So
Well, one of them does.
they just said, hey, we're done, so you can put my name on it, I don't care.
No, I mean, one of them decided not to go through the city and develop in the city and came to the township.
Yes.
So that's not 100% accurate. I mean, they found, and if you read that they had
I'm
some.
just referring to city proper, city of Mount
Right,
Pleasant proper.
yes, that they came to the township and developed in the township and had a few nice things to say. That was their statement. So,
Yes,
I mean, there's give and take is what I'm getting at. I mean,
yes.
I believe the information you put down is 100% accurate and not made up. I mean, you're an honest person, and if you tell me something, I do believe you. So there was something positive from the township perspective as well.
And I'm not gonna say anything, I'll leave it alone.
Well, that was their statement. You didn't make it. I mean, that was their statement that you just.
That's correct, yes.
Well, we'll look forward to reading what you bring us if you are able to put something together. I do want to say, to go back to several people have raised it. I mean, typically when projects get to us, we end up approving them. But one of the reasons for that is that we do have a competent and experienced and dedicated township staff that, the things are in good shape for the most part by the time they get to us. And so, we're able to go ahead and approve them. And as has been pointed out, the concerns seem to be more about the ones where it doesn't even get to us. It's the decision is made at an earlier stage not to not to pursue it. Certainly, I would like to know as much specifics as possible in terms of, what regulations are a problem. Because we can look at that and say, okay, is that the right regulation to have or not? And we can make recommendations. Now, maybe we decide, that's a regulation you need, and so, we bite the bullet on that, but maybe we don't. And certainly also if there are specific, personality issues, that seems like it would be more something to report to the township supervisor perhaps, or the township manager perhaps, but yeah, no, I mean, they don't have to give their names, but if there are things we can latch on to say this is causing problems, at least from their perspective, I'd certainly be interested to know that.
Would it be possible to have, and I don't know how many have come to Mr. Nanny and Peter, but has there been something that's come to you that just never got out of the gate, where maybe you could share with, not tonight, but another night, but you could share with us, hey, we don't have to use names. Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so came together with a project, and it just didn't get out of the gate because of X, Y, Z. That might lead us to the regulation that maybe we would or would not feel needs discussion, without having to give names of any one particular person.
Yeah, I mean, you could, we can ask, Rodney and Peter to give us their, their perspective or from their point of view, but we're also getting it from the opposite side here. I mean, the one thing, I'll be the first to admit, I've never submitted a project or even contemplated submitting a project for something like this, because it's just not my field, it's not what I do. And so I don't have the experience of what it's like to be a developer in Mount Pleasant. That's why I'm interested in knowing what their perspectives are. And so, but yes, we can ask, I mean, do you guys have any that you can think of where you had the sense that somebody walked away and it was because there was either too much regulation or the wrong kinds of regulations, or I don't know what, but just since Commissioner Thering raised the question, I guess I'd ask for your...
Speaking generally, before I came to the township, I worked as a private consultant. At one time, if you recall, in our zoning ordinance project, Chris Dusen from McKenna Associates was the lead consultant. I worked in some cases for him in communities, and in at least one case he worked for me in a community. But I did exactly what he did, working for a variety of communities across the state. One of the communities I worked in had a township supervisor that has since retired, and he would look at me and he would say, "Your job is to help people be successful," and they would pause, and he would say, "And occasionally your job is to help them be successful somewhere else." And what he meant by that was not squeeze them until they go away, not retaliate or any kind of retribution or bureaucratic slow down, nothing like that. He wasn't talking about that. What he was talking about was, if there are projects that don't fit this community, as expressed in our master plan, as expressed in our zoning ordinance, if they just are foreign to that, there's no way to fit them in, because that's not the character of this community. And this community was actually a similar one to here, in that it was partly urban and partly rural. It was on the edge of a larger urban area. It had a large area that was farming. It had a significant area that was water and sewer. They had essentially established a growth boundary between those two, and that was usually where our arguments were, was over that growth boundary. And that's what he was saying. He was saying, we need to explain to people that this is just not a good fit. Here is what our ordinance says. Here's what our plan says. You're wanting, this says X, and you're wanting to do Q. you know, it's not even close, not even in the same area of the alphabet. And so we would encourage you to take Q and maybe look at a site elsewhere where Q was a better fit. And typically, as I said, for this community, it was a urban versus rural, and people wanted to take a piece of farm ground that was just outside the sewer district and make it a, you know, a high density development. So, but that's essentially what sometimes my job was in a consulting world, is to help people understand that this is not a good fit for this community. Here's what they've established as their policies. You know, there's not a way we can get into that, and how can we help you find a better way to do this? Peter and I meet with people all the time. Sometimes it's just a phone call, a quick question. Sometimes it's a Zoom meeting. Sometimes it's in person, either here or next door in our small conference room. Sometimes it's on site. I'm happy to meet people on site if that's the best way to be able to give the answers or help them understand the issues or challenges or opportunities that there might be. In any case, where there's a project that's coming up, where somebody's proposing something, our job is to answer their questions. Our job is to help them understand what they might need to do in order to be able to do that project. Is there an approval process? And maybe it's a minor site plan, which is an administrative approval, where the zoning administrator takes a look at it and takes action on it. Maybe it's a full preliminary and final site plan that comes to you. Maybe it's a special use, whatever it might be. In some cases, it might be a planned unit development. I had a meeting with some folks that were interested in a project. I met them on site for them because it was easier. It was a fairly substantial group of people, and they were floating the idea of something that does not fit in our zoning ordinance at all. It doesn't fit in our zoning ordinance. It doesn't fit in our master plan. It is an activity that was not envisioned in any way by these documents. Now, to make it a bad activity or good activity, that's not for me to decide. My role is to explain what the requirements are. My role is to explain what the ordinance says, what the master plan says, to provide options where I can. And in this case, what I explained to them was that the only way this project could be brought forward is through planned unit development, because that's the process where somebody can bring something that's not a fit. You know, not a good fit in the ordinance, doesn't fit the type box of the B4 or the C, the R2A or whatever that district might be. I said it's going to be a pretty big hill to climb, and I will let people know that if I see that they're going to have a hard process to go through, I'm going to let them know this is going to be challenging for you. You need to be ready. You need to be thinking about this at a time. In the materials you provide, you need to anticipate the questions and have answers. And part of our job is to help people bring forward their best proposal to you, their best application. And so we will explain to people, here are some of the things that we see as are questions that are likely going to come up. And so part of the reason why you've seen site plans that you can look at and go, wow, that looks good, or maybe with minor conditions, it's housekeeping type things, you can improve it, is because the applicants have heard that, heard some things you need to think about and respond to, because we've heard you ask those same questions of others. And so we've let them know, these are some questions that are likely to come up. If you can answer them ahead of time, answer them right on the plan, that will ease your process forward. So that's what we do. I can't think of any time other than marijuana recently where I've had to say to somebody, I want to help you be successful somewhere else. The Board of Trustees has established a policy related to marijuana establishments that's clear, and there's not an option here. The only option that we have is the one that we're required to have by law, or two actually, which of course patients they are allowed, they're protected activity. And then marijuana caregivers, which you recall we took care of that amendment to add medical marijuana caregivers into our zoning ordinance because of a change, in that case, in a Michigan Supreme Court decision that caused them to now fall under our zoning regulations. But beyond that, there's a strict policy that says no marijuana establishments. And so we've had a number of calls from people that have said, we want to do this here. We're very excited to come to the township, and we've had to say, I'm sorry, there's not, the policy right now is not to do that. Even in that case, the answer, though, also includes this. That is a Board of Trustees policy. If you're interested in having that discussion with the Board of Trustees, my suggestion would be to start with a letter to the Board of Trustees that you can provide to us. You can email it to me or email it to the office, and it will be included in the packet, and you can even come to the meeting and speak. And if you really want to, you can request to make a presentation. So there's, even in that case, we're not just simply saying no, we're saying here is the avenue that you have. So far, none of them have taken me up on that one, but we do, we're always looking for avenues, and on occasion that avenue is be successful somewhere else, but it's very rare.
Can I interject on that particular issue? Only from the standpoint of the composition of our board has changed since that policy was adopted. I don't know how frequently that's reviewed, but I can say from my position as a planning commissioner that I would continue to encourage the board to reconsider that specific policy. It is the law of the land now. There are development opportunities that could be available in this community, and I think that is a particular issue, an area of development that I think if the board has that right to establish that, but at the same time I think that should be something that's reviewed regularly and not just sits there, well, this is the policy and we don't take it up or review it. So I don't know how frequently that gets reviewed, but that's my 2 cents on that issue.
Well, this is in part a land use issue. In terms of, as you said, these are, I can't call them lawful land uses. Marijuana is still a legal substance. There is an exception to enforcement in the state act related to these things. Carved out this space where there's no enforcement of the laws that say it's illegal. But nonetheless, it's become a land use issue in that sense. And so my suggestion would be is that it would be a reasonable conversation to have as part of the master plan update. I think as we've talked, I mentioned at least once before, that the master plan is required to be reviewed every 5 years. Well, next year is the 5-year point, and we are going to be bringing to you basically some things that we've noticed that we'd like you to consider as part of a potential update. But we will be required to put on the agenda, I think it's sometime in March or April, if I recall, was when the 5-year point comes. That we'll have, and we can put it on anytime we want. You can, if you would like to have it on the agenda next meeting, we can have it on the agenda. It can be on there, as a recurring item if you like. But you are required at least once every 5 years to open up the master plan, review it, and have a discussion, and come to a decision by motion as to whether you like it and you don't think it needs to change, or we think it needs to be updated. And that motion might identify the updates or kind of areas to look at or not. But at the very least, it needs to either say we like it doesn't need change, or we think it ought to be updated. And if you think it ought to be updated, that's your motion. That essentially starts the process for that. There's no deadline for completing an update, but at least once every 5 years you have to look at it and make a decision. And so from a perspective of land use and looking at it, I think there's value in having the conversation about marijuana. There are pros and cons to marijuana establishments. There is a marketplace, and that marketplace is rapidly changing, as it has been since 2008, when the first law was enacted. But it's absolutely worth having the conversation, and I think master plan is probably the framework for that, and frankly, it could be the framework for a lot of this. You're talking about the development community that can be made part of that priority of discussion as part of the master plan update as well.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So, we've been talking for not quite 45 minutes, a good discussion. But again, we want to kind of take a step back and say, okay, where are we at? We have several options. We can continue this discussion next time. We can continue it now. We can continue it again. We can set a public hearing date. You know, what's your pleasure?
This has all been great conversation. I did have a question about one other item. I get that we're getting a little long in the tooth here in this meeting, but and maybe it's for the next our next conversation. The zoning board of appeals language. I know that it was kind of eliminated from one section and kind of wholesale rewritten. In looking at this, I just don't see what was new and what is. It's all, you know what I mean? There's no edited or highlighted, I guess, areas where it's new. I know that you mentioned something about I shouldn't forget this term because it's a huge thorn in my side. There was an update that you said you had made to substantial justice. Yes,
yeah.
yes, that's what it was.
Well, first of all, actually, and talking about the zoning board of appeals for a moment, if you look on page 116, up at the top, there's a typo. And so I just want to make you aware of the typo. I'm not trying to change the size of the zoning board of appeals. It says the zoning board of appeals shall consist of 3 regular members. That's not correct. It's 5. I will simply, so I want to just mention that since we're talking about it. The reason that came up is that I had 3 on the brain because it takes 3 members to do anything in the zoning board of appeals. No matter how many are present, 3 have to vote in favor of something in order for it to be passed. And I was doing edits and I got edited 1 too many spots, so that's how that happened. But this, you're absolutely right. What we proposed to do was to delete the existing text of section 14.4, which is called variances and appeals, and make it the zoning board of appeals section. And I looked at trying to do it in a format of strike through and underline, but the organization of the ordinance just was not conducive to that. And I wanted to make sure that this was legible for you. I absolutely can go back and provide you with the existing language. Of course, you have the ordinance, so you can see the existing language. But this was trying to update the organization for readability and for clarity, but also update the language throughout because there were several, number of places, more than several, where it was not consistent with the state act. So we'll make sure that those were taken care of correctly.
That whole section then is, 14.4 is new tax.
New, yep.
Okay. There was the earlier one that was also all new, 12.6, I think, and it wasn't any color, it just was regular text, so you had to read the thing to know that that was a new thing.
Right, and we noted that in here at the beginning, that we didn't want to give you pages of underlined text.
Yeah,
it becomes
yeah.
unreadable.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so we just noted at the beginning.
Yeah. I don't know if you like it, but I find the yellow highlighting, I use that in my own documents. Sometimes I'll highlight the new parts just as a background.
Just as a pointer to say this was edited or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, because I understand what he's saying about
Yeah.
there's certain points where strike through and colors of text
Yeah.
become too much.
So, and again, we can have I don't know what the rest of the commission wants to do. I would like to have maybe a little bit more detailed conversation about the standards for review section. But, I don't know if tonight is the night for that or what. I do like the idea. What I do like is the idea of giving the ZBA, particularly given the fact that I don't know if this is new or if I just wasn't aware of this, but the conflict of interest, if a planning commissioner who sits on the board, which would be me, has voted on a prior issue, then I have to declare a conflict and cannot participate in that vote. I wasn't aware of that. I don't know if it's new or not, but knowing that the representative from the planning commission who may have had very intimate knowledge of what has happened in the prior proceedings doesn't have a say in that vote. I want to make sure that we have the strongest kind of guidance possible within reason to help the ZBA frame what is acceptable and not acceptable for variance, because it continues to be my opinion, even though we don't meet often, it continues to be my opinion that that variances should be occasional or rare and not all the time. And it feels like when we get together to talk about a variance, we hand them out eagerly. So the more information we can give, the better.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one thing I'll say about that is that we have the same situation with regards to the Board of Appeals, that Peter obviously works with folks working with zoning permit, whatever that application process may be. We're always working with people to try to find ways that they can meet the ordinance requirements. If we adjust X, can we make that adjustment? Can you do something here that where you can get this project into the ordinance? People have, sometimes people have a fully formed notion. I must have a 40 by 80 building, when our ordinance doesn't allow a 40 by 80 building on this particular lot. So sometimes we have to kind of walk people through that. Well, I can just get a variance. Well, yes, you could. Here are the standards that you would need to meet. You need to make the argument. And we always tell people, you want to come to the Board of Appeals in your application with your arguments written, because that way they get to read it well ahead of time. And then, of course, you can come to the meeting and make your arguments too. But you want to give your strongest application ahead of time. So, but often the cases that are coming to the Board of Appeals are the ones where there was no option. Where we've, in terms of working with the applicant, we've exhausted all the possibilities where they might be able to do it within the boundaries of the ordinance. And so I can understand why it feels like the Board of Appeals grants more variances than not, but it is largely because the cases that are coming to the Board of Appeals are the really hard case ones, the ones that there was no other possible solution.
And it may be just anecdotal on my part, and maybe I'm misinterpreting or misrepresenting. So I would admit that in my time there, maybe I'm not remembering things correctly. But seemingly, with one notable exception that I can think of, seemingly the number one reason for a variance is that it would cost me more money to do it the way that code says to do it, which, in my mind, is the argument has merit to a certain extent, and beyond that holds no water. And what I don't see here is any kind of clarification for the members as to how to treat the monetary concern, because it does seem to be, we had one that came and said, hey, the builder didn't get the permit, they waited, they ordered materials, and I got $40,000 worth of materials sitting here that I can't build now. And rightfully so, the builder should be the one that is responsible for that. But it seems like it's repeatedly, hey, this is going to cost me money now because I need this variance, otherwise it's going to cost me money. That's a gray area. I get it, but I would love to see something in here that offers a little bit of guidance on that.
Well, we have to work within state law, so that the state law does not say thou shalt not grant a variance if it's only money based. But what we do have, in the standards, at page 122 of the packet, one of the standards is just titled "More Than Mere Inconvenience." And the alleged hardship and practical difficulties that will result from a failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience or an inability to obtain a higher financial return. So that's where we can go for that one, and it's not exactly what you're talking about, but that's the space that you have to work in.
The funny one, I get why the not self-created is also there, and I get the intent of that. The concern I even have with that one is that oftentimes somebody has bought a property knowing the conditions, sometimes knowing the zoning or code that governs that area, but then still comes back and says, I know I bought it this way, but I want a variance. And so, that's another one. And maybe we just can't get to that point, and maybe we just get to the point of detail to clarify all those sorts of things. But it feels like it feels like it's just worthy of having a conversation about these, I guess, and to kind of go into depth as to, is this enough for this particular piece, or is it too much, or that sort of thing. So, and I would love to give you guys plenty of feedback as to my experience on the zoning board of appeals because it's a thankless job. So, even though maybe this job is a thankless job too. So,
I will say this about the Board of Appeals, is I'm deeply appreciative of the Board of Appeals, regardless of whether they vote my way or the other way. I've had Board of Appeals that have gone a completely opposite the direction I would prefer they go. But I'm deeply appreciative of every single one of them, every single time, whatever the outcome is, because this is a quasi-judicial body. This is a group of people that are acting together as a judge. That's really what it is. 3 people at least have to vote out of 5 in favor of something. So together, they're one body that's a judge, and they're making absolutely true judgment calls. These provide guidance for those judgment calls, but we can't mandate certain
right. Yeah.
judgments.
Yeah.
But it is the hardest, I think, the hardest role in zoning is to be a Board of Appeals member that actually follows the requirements that apply. Some Board of Appeals members, unfortunately, think that their job is to give out variances. That's a problem. That's a training issue. And usually we can solve that through some training and help them understand. But done right, it is a very, very difficult job, an absolutely essential one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're certainly not putting this to bed tonight, so there will be other opportunities to revisit those things.
Yep.
I wanted to make one brief comment before we kind of, I think, probably decide what to do exactly with this. But there was a case from, might even be 2 years ago now, but there was a case, one of the new buildings down either on Broomfield or even further south than that, where the hang-up was the facade materials that they were going to use. They were going to use like metal, and there was an issue where it was limited to stone and brick and other sorts of things. And so I looked in section 720, building form and composition, and I read through that, but then I went back to the master plan. It's in the master plan that it actually specifies building materials for the facades of mixed-use buildings. So you didn't choose to bring forward anything on 720, and I understand why now, because it doesn't seem like the zoning ordinance is too prescriptive. It seems like if anything was too prescriptive, it was perhaps the master plan, because that's where you were getting that from. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Right, you're talking about the original Den on Broomfield project.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what happened was that the earliest versions of the Den on Broomfield project were brick. It was very nice brick buildings, brick and block, but it was kind of traditional masonry architecture. That version, I don't think, if it got to the Plan Commission, it was before my time, so I don't think it got to the Plan Commission. But I think I still have a picture of it in my office of that early version. The version that came to the Plan Commission reflected challenges with getting those masonry products. I think they still had a desire to do that, but they couldn't get it. So they proposed, as you said, metal panels and various types of metal exterior. And in our report, it wasn't that we were saying they couldn't do it, because there was nothing in our ordinance that said they couldn't do it. That section 720 didn't exist at the time that the Den on Broomfield first came before you. What we said was it's not consistent with the master plan, and in the language of the master plan, in tying that language to site plan approval, because in the state act and in our ordinance for site plan, it says that site plan shall be consistent not only with the ordinance provisions, but with the township's planning documents. And that was a change when the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act was adopted in 2008. So it more closely tied the master plan in to the site plan process. It didn't say the master plan was now a regulation. What it said was it needed to be consistent. So follow the guidelines, you might say. And so in that review, we simply noted that this didn't seem to be consistent with the intent and the details of that are expressed as policies for the Bridgewater or Bluegrass Center District. And it was up to you. And that's how we put it. You as a planning commission, we encourage you to look at this and decide where you would like to go. And ultimately that those decisions were made. and the project was approved, and that was absolutely fine. All we were doing was simply bringing to you that this is an issue, which is what we do. Often with these projects that come, as you said, in large part, their plans look good, because they are, because we've worked with them, because we have a much clearer ordinance than the 1991 ordinance, because we work with applicants to help them understand what the requirements are. The base level, this is what thou shalt do, per the ordinance. So those things are taken care of. And so usually the plans that come before you are ones where there might be 1 or 2 or 3 issues that are judgment calls. Areas of flexibility like landscaping or parking or other things where the ordinance gives you the judgment call to make. Or it may be things like this where this doesn't seem quite consistent. We talked earlier about things that are not consistent with our desired, our preferences based described in the master plan. So that was one where we just simply brought this to you. Here's the issue. Here's what we see. And then you as a planning commission ultimately made that decision, which is exactly how it should be. So even in that section 720, that section 720 was never about thou shalt have masonry. There are some communities that tried that. That became a source of substantial amount of money for lawyers for a number of years. There was a group that represented the masonry industry that was trying to get local communities to actually mandate having masonry. Like the Corn Growers Association telling communities you need to mandate farmers grow corn. And a lot of communities did do that, and then there were fights about it. That section 720 is just trying to provide a mechanism, the ordinance, to tie back to the plan.
Yeah.
And so it does still have plenty of flexibility in it.
Yeah. So if we decide at some point that we want to be more flexible with building facades, it would be in the master plan when we do that revision where you would probably change that language.
I think that's always a good starting point, is with the master plan. Because the benefit of looking at it from a policy perspective, which is what the master plan is it's a simpler discussion. Here are our options that we could choose the option we want. Okay, this is our preferred policy. We state it in the master plan, and then from there we can take that into the ordinance. I mean, as an example, for the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees operates under a policy governance model where they have a policy governance document that sets out how they're going to operate as a board, and sets out their desired relationship with the township manager, who is their employee. As part of that document, you can find it if you go on the website under township manager, departments manager, click on that, down at the bottom there's a link, governance policy. It's worth a read, it's interesting. But right at the beginning of that policy is a section called global ends. And what the other way to think of it, instead of it's global ends, the other way to think of it is desired outcomes. And it's a series of statements that the board has made, and they amend it, update it periodically, that these are the desired outcomes for the community that we want as a board. And they're stated there. Sort of like you stated in your master plan. These are the desired outcomes for our community from a land use and development perspective. They did this more broadly for the things that are important to the board. Those statements that are adopted there become what we as staff focus on, and part of our role is to help to implement those desired outcomes. We want to get to those points, and so if you read that global ends policy, you can see what the board feels is most important for this community from that perspective of what they want to see happen going forward. And those are the actions that we are focused on in our day-to-day activities. It'd be worth taking a look at it. It might be enlightening in terms of how we operate is directly taken from those statements.
Okay. So I think, to summarize kind of where we are again, we can have a motion to set a public hearing for this, or we can decide that we want to have some further reflection and push that back to next month's meeting if people want time to look through this further and bring up other topics. So I think that's where we are.
I would agree. I think that based on the robust conversation we've had tonight, I would like to give commissioners one more chance to scrutinize this a little bit and hopefully be able to vote next month as to moving forward with a public hearing, that sort of thing. But give them a month to just kind of digest this and review it with, with that perspective again, to see if there's anything else that jumps out.
Okay, rest of you okay with that? I'm seeing nodding, so that sounds like that's the consensus. So we won't have a motion tonight. We'll just bring this back on the agenda for next month. Any idea on what that agenda is going to look like? Is it going to be a busy one or not so busy one?
We have one project, I think that very likely, the Prestige Center project, the assisted living memory care facility. They have been working with the various outside agencies. I expect that they're going to be applying for a combined preliminary and final site plan approval. You of course saw the PUD concept plan, which is very close to a preliminary site plan, and so they're I think looking to come for that combined approval. They have not applied yet, but been told that that's going to be coming. I think there's one other project that I don't recall the specifics at the moment, but Clint's Autobody. That one we kind of expect it might be coming. We haven't heard anything, but it's also one that ought to be about ready. I think those are the only two applications I'm aware of.
Okay, so it sounds like we should have time to have another, discussion on this. So definitely spend some time with this over the next month. And, if you have things that you have concerns with that are being proposed, or if you have other areas of the ordinance that you think, need to be looked at, bring your ideas. So
one quick comment. There were a couple of areas, a couple of potential amendments that didn't get into this set, and it was in part because we just didn't have it fully formed yet. One was an amendment related to accessory structures. It's really a housekeeping item, but because of the structure of that section, it's a bit of a challenge to deal with it. Right now, what it is there's no real good language in there talking about the rules that apply to accessory structures for multiple family non-residential activities. It appears to, well, let's just leave that. There's an appear to. There's a little bit of a fuzziness in the language, and we're looking at how we might clarify that so we can eliminate any potential problem there. It just didn't. We ran out of time to come up with a way to do that without reworking the whole section. So the other one was chickens, and I think you've mentioned this before. There is still an interest in being able to have a few hens. Right now, the language of ordinance limits that to educational purposes, and it's pretty restrictive. And beyond hens, unfortunately, there are other things like pygmy goats and sheep. My favorite was the sheep. There's in some areas there's lamb clubs where literally you're taking a sheep or two sheep and you raise them. And it's like they're your pet, and that anyway. So there's more than just chickens that need to be considered, and that one is really one where we'd like to ultimately come to you with kind of a bullet point potential sort of policy format. What do you think about these things? Because we don't want to draft something up language-wise necessarily, because it absolutely is a policy decision first. So those may come up down the road as if this moves forward, over time, and I have no concern about taking as much time as you choose. None of these things need to be changed tomorrow. Even the ones mandated by state law, they're mandated by state law. We have to follow the state law regardless of what our ordinance says. We're just trying to get the ordinance consistent with it. So if it takes time to get there, it's completely okay. But we may, as we're looking at from our side, we may bring those into the mix as well. If not, we can deal with them at a later time.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so then we'll carry this over to this item over to next month. Other business, is there anyone aware of any other business that needs to come before us tonight? Okay, seeing none, then extended public comment. Anyone who'd like to address the planning commission on any item, whether it's on tonight's agenda or not, come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Extended public comments open at 9:16. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and close that back up at 9:17. And final board comment, any final comments from board members? Okay, if not, once again, if you know anyone for sidewalks and pathways, encourage them to apply, and, because that's another thing we'll be coming back to. But other than that, we have completed our agenda, so we'll stand adjourned until our November meeting.